Yes, graduates, welcome to Hard Talk Podcast with HTK. Fasten your seatbelts. Hey, users and subscribers, welcome back to another episode of Hard Talk. Listen, we are going to go into the analysis of the second autopsy that was done on Adriana Younge's body. The results have come in, and it's important that we listen to what Dr. Terry has to say. So, Dr. Terry is the renowned doctor who conducted the autopsy in Georgia, in the United States of America. Now, as you know, the police had a couple of days ago released a full report claiming that the death of 11-year-old Adriana Younge was officially ruled a drowning with no signs of foul play. They specifically pointed to the findings that were submitted by Mr. Leonard McCoshen, who is a retired Royal Canadian Mounted Police investigator, who stated that there was no evidence of foul play by persons named or unnamed during the investigation. According to the results of the comprehensive postmortem examination, which included toxicology and DNA testing that was carried out, the key findings were no signs of acute injury or trauma were present. Toxicology results showed ethanol levels consistent with postmortem decomposition. Assay kit and DNA analysis for potential suspects were negative. Skin and airway changes were in line with prolonged submersion and drowning, and that there was no evidence of restraint, struggle, removal, and return of the body. According to the Guyanese police report, the pathologist had concluded that Adriana Younge drowned, that she likely sank to the bottom of the pool and later surfaced due to natural decomposition processes common in tropical climates. Now, I want you to pay attention to the part of the report that said that the skin and the airways were investigated, right? So says the results of the first report. So these were the words of the Guyanese police force. But of course, now we have a situation where the family were not happy with what was happening. They did not feel as though they were getting any justice at all. And even despite originally trying to bury her, they stopped the funeral proceedings after the leaked voice note of the nurse, which everybody started to condemn. And, they all claimed that it was fake, etc. If you notice, I was quiet, dead silent on that actually, because I'm aware of how corrupt these systems can be. And there was a lot of sense in the things the nurse was saying. Anyway, this funeral was put off and the body was then sent to the United States of America for continued investigations or a second postmortem. I want you to listen to what Dr. Terry has to say, and we're going to break it down bit by bit for your understanding.
Could you first tell me, when you opened the body, what were you looking for? What did you observe?
Okay. Well, I guess first of all, let me say thank you for having the confidence in allowing me to conduct this examination. I know this is a very sensitive topic, and as with every case, I do the best I can in doing the examination. And in doing this case, realizing I'm doing a second autopsy, it's understood that this is mainly for quality control type purposes, because the first autopsy has already been conducted, and at that point in time, that is your best opportunity to see the pathology or injuries and disease processes in the original state, because by the time I do a second autopsy, artifacts have been introduced from the first autopsy, and in this case, as well as from the embalming.
So one of the first points that we need to pay attention to is the fact that Dr. Terry has said that she is doing a second autopsy, but the first autopsy would have been the ideal opportunity to find out everything that would have gone wrong where Adriana is concerned. So she's working from a perspective of disadvantage because they have already introduced instruments to the body. It's been tampered with, manipulated, dissected, etc. And she is having to work on a later stage of decomposition of the body itself.
But in doing this examination, first of all, I'm making sure that the first examination was conducted correctly and thoroughly, and it appeared that it was. There are some minor differences in techniques of dissection, but I think the first examination was conducted thoroughly.
Okay, so you heard that. She made sure that the first autopsy was done correctly. That is her standard procedure. And she was able to confirm that the pathologists in Guyana actually did a good job at doing their original autopsy. She could tell that the procedures were followed through accordingly, despite differences in how the body was handled, the dissection process. So even if it's different mechanisms or different methods, it still was done properly. So how is it that we are getting differences in results? Let's keep listening.
And as I'm doing this examination, first and foremost, I'm looking for any trauma to the body and making sure that there is no trauma that has been overlooked in the first examination. And also in going through the previously dissected organs, looking to see if there's any trauma to them as well as any disease processes at play. And also at this point in time, I'm collecting specimens in case additional testing needs to be done. Again, realizing the optimal specimens are from the first examination, but I'm conducting this examination keeping in mind that I'm not going to have a chance to go back. And so anything I need to do at this point in time. And so I think I over-collected things, but again, I don't get a second chance to go back and be thorough. So those are the things that I was mindful of in the course of doing this examination.
So you got that. In case you didn't quite understand, every organ that was dissected, she went back to those organs. She checked to make sure that there was no trauma to those organs. That would have implied that this could have led to her death. She then collected tissue samples from every organ that she went through. She said to the point where she took too many things because she's aware that there will not be another chance to re-enter the body. And this is probably likely to the state of decomposition. So I suppose time is of the essence.
And did you find any evidence of trauma?
No, I did not.
Secondly, the first autopsy ruled that Adriana Younge drowned. Would you come to that conclusion?
At this point in time, I would not come to that conclusion. I think that there's a lot of information that needs to be gained, a lot of investigation that needs to be done. Drowning is a diagnosis of exclusion, and by that, it means that you have to exclude other potential causes of death. And oftentimes, when a body is found in water, the assumption is that the person has drowned. There is nothing at autopsy that is diagnostic of drowning. So again, that's what I mean by saying drowning is a diagnosis of exclusion.
This was a very important part of Dr. Carol Terry's speech. If you notice, she said that drowning is a diagnosis of exclusion, which means that you have to exclude every single other cause of death first before you arrive at the deduction that the child has drowned. She's saying that other things have not yet been eliminated and that there could be several other causes, but the drowning is not the one that she has found any evidence of at the autopsy. What? So, despite the police report and the findings of all these pathologists in Guyana, we have yet another, a second autopsy that is counteracting the previous findings. What happened? How is it that we have got a thorough first autopsy based on Dr. Terry's conclusion, all was done correctly, and now we have an even more thorough re-entry into the body, sampling, going over the previous steps of the first autopsy, and yet the first autopsy, though it was thorough, comes to the conclusion of drowning, and the second autopsy on a more decomposed body does not come to that conclusion at all, because other causes have not been ruled out effectively.
And in this case, what I have been told regarding the circumstances are so suspicious that I really think that there needs to be a very thorough investigation, and I would want to know the results of, say, toxicologic testing or drug testing from the first examination, as well as any additional testing that was done in accordance with the first autopsy.
So you would be very reluctant to say that this child drowned?
Yes, I would. Based on the circumstances that are reported to me, I would.
And you would recommend a thorough criminal investigation?
Yes, I would.
Okay, so I have heard what Dr. Terry is basically saying, that there were too many other suspicious situations around the death of the child for it to be jumped to that conclusion that it was a drowning, that there needs to be several other investigations taking place. However, what I'm concerned about here in this conclusion is that it isn't obvious to her that it was a drowning, one, that she has to obviously send off these samples for further investigation, and she hasn't had the results yet, that she's wanting to see the toxicology report and the findings of the first autopsy. Now, why was this not handed over to this doctor?
I also observed that you mentioned that there was some part of the body that was not examined. Could you take me through that?
Well, I don't know if I could say necessarily that it was not examined, but looking at the structures of the neck, the hyoid bone, which is a U-shaped bone that sits at the base of the tongue, as well as the thyroid cartilage, which is part of the voice box or the larynx, they still had a good bit of soft tissue, muscle, and whatnot around them. Now, certainly you could feel them and tell that they were intact, but for a case such as this, I wanted to expose them a little bit more so that there's no question that these structures were not broken.
Did you hear that? Did you hear that? She made it very clear that the throat area was not exposed enough. It was not properly investigated. Remember, I highlighted that this was a part of the police report, that they had checked this area of the anatomy. Now she's saying that it was not checked. So why was this part of the anatomy missed? This is a very key thing in this investigation. My only disappointment is that she never gave any information further on this part of the anatomy and her findings. Quite possibly in the samples that she took, she may end up with some kind of conclusion. Let us see where this part of the investigation leads.
How problematic, doctor, how problematic would it be to say that Adriana Younge drowned?
Again, I think it is problematic because of drowning being a diagnosis of exclusion, and what I was told regarding the circumstances of her disappearance and death and the subsequent finding of the body in a pool where it reportedly had previously been searched and she was not there. So that I find very disturbing. It's not like she was seen playing in the water and then a little bit later is found under the water. This as was told to me, she was seen in the water and then disappeared. And the pool was searched, she was not there, and then sometime later is found in the pool. That is disturbing because I don't think you can simply write it off as this child drowned. You've got to be concerned, did she die sometime earlier and then was placed in the pool? Because there's not going to be any good way to discern whether or not that happened. That's going to require an investigation and additional testing to see if there's anything that may be amiss, such as unexpected drugs in her system or any indication of a sexual assault. Things like this need to be considered and need to be looked at, given, again, the circumstances that were reported to me.
If this government in Guyana knows that a second autopsy was taking place and that first autopsy was above board, why wasn't this docket, this information, handed over so that there should be no delay in the findings? Why is there a delay in the process of comparison between Dr. Terry and the first autopsy results? All of that information should have been presented to Dr. Terry so that she could then right away look through what the results were, what the toxicology report says, everything, the findings, etc., and do her comparison on the spot to come up with a more concrete rationale behind why it is that she refuses the diagnosis of drowning. It seems as though the Guyanese government are deliberately dragging their feet in cooperating with this family, because this information should in no way, shape or form be still outstanding to Dr. Terry. So people, you hearing what I hear? She is insisting on things that now the police report claims that they have already covered. Their conclusion was that the toxicology was clear, that there were no drugs. They also claimed that they did an assay investigation and there was no evidence of that. So they have already started to cover those tracks in response to this doctor's findings. So do you see that it was a strategic publication of that report despite knowing that the body was going to America? I can already see that whatever documentation which never got passed on is going to now be presented in such a way that it's going to prove the report they have already published. Delays give opportunity for manipulation, for changing of details easily.
Doc, I need to ask, and I must. Did this body lose any forensic value?
I would say yes. The examination that I had the opportunity to do is compromised at this point because, again, it's a second autopsy. So we have issues of artifacts that are introduced by the first autopsy. We've got decomposition that has taken place, and we've got embalming that has occurred. Now, so that introduces a lot of artifact to the body, and it compromises the examination somewhat. But this diagnosis and this investigation doesn't hinge just on the autopsy. It primarily hinges on the investigation of the death or the investigation of any potential crime that occurred in association with this child's disappearance.
I never understood how they were so quick to push to burial for this child, you know. It just didn't sit well with me. I was like, this is one of the quickest funerals I've ever seen, considering the suspicious circumstances under which that child had passed. It was just too quick to me. I don't know if that's how things are normally done in Guyana, but it was just very, very quick. And I think that it needed time for the investigation to take place. And then, of course, you know, embalming her, as the lady says, that's an introduction of chemicals to the body. It alters the state, the original condition of it, and can mask certain chemicals or certain certain things that happened to the body that could have led to the child's death. It would have masked. It can interfere with it, and that is such a shame.
What next for you? What next from here, from the autopsy table? What next?
Well, what next for me is I will generate my report. I will look at slides from the tissue, under the microscope. These I don't think are going to be, helpful in propagating or furthering the investigation. For me, I would be more concerned about the results of the first examination and any testing that occurred in accordance with that first examination. Because, as I said, based on my essentially doing quality control checking in the second autopsy, I think the first examination, at least technically from what I could see in association with doing the second autopsy, was done very competently and thoroughly, and I would want to see what the results are.
And again, why? Why is this doctor still asking for the results of the first autopsy? Why were the results of the first autopsy not faxed across, emailed across, whatever it is that it's possible to get it into her hands for a comparison? It doesn't sit well with me that this information was withheld. I think that this is where we are going to end up with even more turmoil in this case, because they have published a report claiming that their conclusion is final and that there are no circumstances around that which was suggested by the doctor, which is whether or not there was any narcotics in her system, whether or not she was essayed, all of those things. And therefore, it is, it's to me going to lead to a counterproductive response, even when she gets that report at this late stage, because it gives them the opportunity to corrupt files. And I'm being as blunt as possible when it comes to this. I genuinely hope that when Dr. Terry receives this copy of the first autopsy report, that she is able to, go through it with a fine-tooth comb and see if anything was in fact changed, or if anything doesn't make sense, or anything could have been missed. I mean, it could have been a simple error. At the end of the day, we also have to give that the benefit of the doubt. However, this is very clear from what she is saying, that she cannot arrive at a justifiable conclusion that this little girl has drowned. And that is enough for the people of Guyana. That is enough to warrant a response from the parents to say that they still need justice. That is enough to justify the reactions of the Guyanese public, the rebellion and the protests, all justified. And it is also enough to put a question mark over the handling of that nurse. Did she speak truth? Was there something that she knew that is being hidden from the public? Anyway, should you wish to go and watch the rest of this interview, you can head over to HGP TV on Facebook. I will place the link in the comments. This is your girl, Head Teacher.